Hello, welcome back. You're watching Breakfast with Naga and Charlie State.
Good morning to you. Time now is 7:33. The killing of Sir David Amess, well, it rocked MPs across the political divide. It was a tragic reminder of the risks which are faced by some of those in public life.
Kim Leadbeater, whose sister Jo Cox was murdered in her constituency in 2016, is supporting a campaign to give young people a better understanding about how UK politics works. I'm very pleased to say she joins us this morning on the sofa.
Morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm okay. Yeah, it's been a mad few months for me. But I'm delighted to be coming on to talk about Political Literacy Day. It's something I feel passionately about. It's a difficult day to do this, if I'm honest, on the back of what happened yesterday in Parliament. But I think it's really important that we engage young people, particularly with politics, with democracy.
So what we'll do is we'll come back to what you mentioned just a moment ago, in a moment, if you don't mind. As soon as you start trying to say, what we want to do is, I don't know what the phrasing you're using is, educate people about politics, make sure people know more about politics. Sometimes almost immediately people step away almost from that phrase, because that in itself sounds like politics is different from life. And I think one of the things that, if I understand where you come from in politics, you're very much helping people to understand that it is life. It's about what you do, and how, your personal lives matter, and that's what politics is about too.
Exactly. Politics is about people. And what struck me during the by-election was we had a 47% turnout in my by-election, and people thought that was good. For me, I was like, hang on a minute, that's 53% of people who didn't go and vote. Now, whoever you want to vote for, clearly I've got my preference, but go out and vote. And you can't blame people for not voting because they don't feel they're engaged with the system. They don't feel that the system does anything for them. So it's really important that I think we help young people particularly, that's where it has to start, understand what politics actually can mean for their lives. But also politicians have got responsibility to engage people and to make sure that we do the best job that we can of showing how we can actually help people. And this is what I was saying to people on the doorsteps, is saying, look, if you've got a problem in your life, your MP is one of those people who should be able to help you. And people do that. We've got some really good people in Parliament, which it's not the easiest day to say that, but we do. And we've got people who really care. So it's how we can connect with people and show them that politics does matter.
You know what this is like, though, because when Jo, your sister, was an MP, you weren't interested.
No, I mean, I don't think
not
that's
in what she did.
true.
I mean, but you just weren't interested in being in politics.
No, this wasn't where I saw my career going. And I've been on a really, a horrific journey to get to where I am now. But I think people like the fact that I'm not from a traditional political background. I talk in language, hopefully, that people understand. I don't want to get absorbed into the Westminster bubble. I want to connect constituencies like mine in Batley and Spen and across the country with politics.
How do you make a difference, though, if you're not in that Westminster bubble? How do you make a difference for your voice in the Commons? When votes are happening, if you are more concerned, as you perhaps should be, with your constituents?
Well, you've got to do both, and that's the challenge, and that's the journey that I'm going on at the moment, is how do you make sure that you've got a vocal presence in Parliament, speaking up for the rights of the people that you represent on the issues that they care about. So I try and spend lots of time listening to people in the constituency and taking their views and opinions to Parliament.
How do you then, if you want people to be politically engaged and you want them to be engaged with what's happening around them, what's happening in the world, how it affects them, how do you square that off when, and you've alluded to this and we'll talk about it, what happened in Parliament yesterday, the row over Owen Paterson, MP, and the change to the rules about how MPs are investigated, when people will look at Parliament and say, this is completely different to my world, and they're doing stuff that I just don't understand.
Yep, I think you're totally right. I think it's a really important question, and that's why this campaign is more important than ever, because yesterday was a really embarrassing day for politics generally, but it was a really shameful day for the government. And it's annoying that some of the media coverage today is about MPs voting for this. No, it was the government that voted yesterday in this shameful, embarrassing manner. All the Labour MPs voted against it. But there is an important point on that, actually, in terms of political education. There's a system in Parliament called pairing. So if you're sick or you can't get to Parliament, you're paired with an MP from a different party, so your votes cancel each other out. So I saw there was a lot of stuff on social media last night. Oh, some MPs from the Labour Party didn't vote. There's a system there in place. So again, unless you understand that system, you don't really know what actually happened yesterday. So there's a piece there about political education. But I think you're right. I think politicians need to be held to account. We need to behave appropriately. And sadly, what we've seen from this situation is that not all MPs do. You can't have a set of rules rules, you break the rules, and then you try and change the rules. And that's what tried to happen yesterday.
And now I fear we're in danger of getting a kind of going down a bit of a sinkhole on this one. But I mean, I think you just said the government voted this down. That's strictly not true, is it? Because the vote was a free vote, wasn't it? It wasn't a whipped vote. The MPs voted on the new motion to do with Owen Paterson. So it wasn't a government decision, was it? It was a vote by MPs.
The other thing on voting within Parliament is you know about the whipping system. Loads of people I speak to don't even understand what whipping means. You are told how to vote. You are encouraged how to vote. Now, that can be done to a greater or lesser degree, I suppose.
So you're saying, did you witness Conservative MPs yesterday being whipped? And people will understand that phrase, you've explained it. They're being encouraged by the government to vote in a certain way. Did you see that happening?
I think, sadly, there is tribalism in politics, isn't there? You're encouraged to stick to your tribe. And on some issues, I think there are issues that transcend party politics. And for me, when it's an issue of morality, then you should be able to vote with your conscience. And I'm not sure that always happens. And again, I'm quite new to this, but there are certain issues where, and we did see some Conservative MPs who voted against the motion yesterday, and I think that's really important. But again, we're getting slightly off the topic of political literacy, and it's really important for me that the more that people understand the system, the more that people are engaged with the system, the more likely they are to, see yesterday as it was, and hopefully not judge all MPs by the same standards that we saw from some of the government yesterday.
The ways some people judge MPs is about how MPs engage in what's going on in the world around them. For example, the row now over the Yorkshire Cricket Club and racism. And in the past, you wouldn't have heard, and I was quite surprised seeing quite a few politicians now coming out saying, this is not acceptable. Whereas before it was almost easy to sit on the sidelines and let these rows play out. How do you feel this is reflecting on, Yorkshire and cricket? Because both of those, the two separately, the game and the area, have come under scrutiny.
Yeah, and these are two things I feel passionately. I'm a really proud Yorkshire woman. My background's in sport. I think sport is extremely powerful in bringing people together and uniting people from different backgrounds, and that's why we have to call out this behaviour when it takes place. So, it should be called out straight away. There's absolutely no place for racism in society. There's no place for racism in sport, and that's what this is. And, this thing about banter, it's used a lot, isn't it? This isn't banter. It's unacceptable behaviour, and it has to be called out wherever it exists.
On that theme of banter, I mean, the Commons, most people don't watch Prime Minister's Question Time. They don't watch it happen, do they? That's the reality. Bits of it get played out in the news later on. What have you witnessed in terms of banter, if you call it that, within the House of Commons? I'm not necessarily in that particular moment in time, Prime Minister's Question Time, but have you witnessed things that you think, this does not play, this cannot be in the real world, something exists within that place? Yeah,
I've witnessed good and I've witnessed not so good. What doesn't get talked about often enough for me is the good stuff that goes on behind the scenes, the cross-party work that goes on. So I've just joined some all-party parliamentary groups on things like political education, on things like women in politics and rugby league, amongst other things. And that's where cross-party work takes place. And that isn't really covered in the media, perhaps because it's probably not quite as exciting as some of the other stuff that goes on in Parliament. But when all people see of Parliament is the shouting that goes on in PMQs on a Wednesday afternoon, and it's quite toxic in there. It's a bit like a bear pit, and that's got to change for me. And when Joe was killed, when David Amess was murdered, we talk about being more civilised and treating each other with more respect, and it just seems very short-lived. And I think you can be passionate, I feel strongly about lots of issues, but you've got to be respectful. And again, until politicians behave in a way that encourages that respect, engaging people with politics is an uphill battle.
Do you think then, given what you just said, do you think we're going forwards or backwards in terms of that? It sounds a bit like you're saying it's at best the same, but possibly worse.
Yeah, it's really hard. I'm not sure things are any better than after Joe was killed. And I guess that's one of the reasons I put myself forward, because I wanted to try and be a small part of changing that, showing that politicians are only human. We're not perfect in any way, shape or form, but we've also got to be responsible for our actions. And sadly, like you say, some of the behaviour, particularly yesterday, you can't have a set of rules that you think don't apply to you. And that's what we saw yesterday, sadly, in terms of this whole corruption issue. How are we going to engage people in politics if they just think that there's people in Parliament who think they're better than anybody else when we're not?
Really interesting hearing your reflections this morning. Thank you very much. And the campaign, which I assume is a cross-party thing, because you want more people to talk about politics generally.
Yeah,
so that's
yeah.
one of the examples.
And what's really lovely today, I'm going to a primary school. It's actually the primary school that my dad went to, back in my constituency, to talk to little ones about school council and political education, and that's where they're really.
You will get some challenging questions.
I know. I'm more nervous about that than this.
Brace yourself, Kim. Thank you.